Back in 2013, Google and LG teamed up to build the original Nexus 5. It was bigger than the prior year's Nexus 4, which was also made by LG, but wasn't overly large in the hand. It was a phone for the masses, and was relatively well received. In 2014, some say that Google jumped the shark, offering a phablet instead of a smartphone, a move that many felt was abandoning the die-hard supporters of the Nexus phone. This year, Google released two Nexus phones, a phablet to follow up the Nexus 6 from last year, and what many are calling a return to its roots with the Nexus 5X. Did LG build a phone worthy of the Nexus 5 name? I'm Joe Levi with Pocketnow, and this is our video review of the Nexus 5X. The first thing you'll notice when you take the Nexus 5X out of its box is just how light it is. At 136 grams, it's slightly heavier than the original Nexus 5, but only slightly. It feels light because we've become accustomed to bulkier and heavier phones, specifically the 184-gram behemoth of last year's Nexus 6. The Nexus 5 doesn't sport the aluminum and glass that many of this year's flagships flaunt. Instead, almost as a throwback to 2 years ago, the 5X uses a matte polycarbonate in one of three colors: carbon, quartz, and ice. The edges feature a subtle chamfer that we've seen on other Nexus devices, which provides just the right amount of grip without getting in the way of looks. The Nexus 5X isn't a particularly small phone, but it's not big either. It's easily pocketable and can be held securely even in petite hands. It's a little taller than the previous model, but we don't think you'll mind. Other than the color, the Nexus 5 comes in two configurations, 16GB and 32GB, with the latter asking a $50 premium over the $379 price of the base model. We think the 32GB version is well worth the cost to upgrade. On the front of the phone is a 5.2-inch screen under a slab of Gorilla Glass 3. With a resolution of 1080 by 1920, the pixel density is an impressive 423 ppi. Though this is slightly lower than the original Nexus 5, thanks to improvements in screen technology, color saturation, deep blacks, and overall sharpness make the screen on the 5X very crisp and clear. Bright when it needs to be, and able to accurately replicate colors, even in sunlight and in the dark, with the brightness turned down low. Some reviewers disagree with this sentiment when compared to the Nexus 6P, but while those conclusions may be accurate, they're also somewhat unfair. The average user won't be dissatisfied with the screen on the Nexus 5X at all. On top of the phone is a single microphone port. To the right is the power button above the volume rocker. On the left is the nano SIM slot. At the bottom is another microphone port, the headphone jack, and the all-new USB Type-C port. The front of the phone also has an ambient light sensor, handset speaker, front-firing speaker, a third microphone, and a tricolor notification LED that, although it's disabled by default, can easily be turned on in the settings. Unlike other Nexus devices, despite having two speaker grills, it's only got one front-firing speaker. The sound it produces is loud and clear, but doesn't have the encompassing volume that we've heard on other Nexi. It's on the back where things get really exciting. For the first time, a Nexus device has a fingerprint scanner, which Google refers to as Android Imprint. It's situated near the top of the phone where the dimple on last year's Nexus 6 and some of Motorola's other phones can be found. Also on the back is the reflective Nexus logo with a fairly prominent LG branding. Oh, and the main camera too. As you'd expect with carrying a phone with a Nexus label, the 5X runs pure Android, the way Google intends it. The bells and whistles are all stock. But sometimes it's the simplicity, the lack of superfluous features, which only serve to pad a spec sheet, that makes something truly elegant. Such is the case with Android 6.0 Marshmallow on the Nexus 5. With Marshmallow, Google continued its foray into active display, pushing rich but black and white notifications to the screen, rather than relying on a notification LED to get your attention. Unlike previous generations of Nexus phones that may have had an LED, here access to your LED is tucked neatly inside the sound and notification settings. Android Pay also makes its debut as a preloaded application on the Nexus 5, replacing Google Wallet, which has been a staple of the Nexus brand since it came out on the Nexus S in 2011. In the New to Nexus thread, Google picked the Nexus 5 as the first device to officially support the aforementioned Android Imprint fingerprint scanning and security subsystems. Other OEMs beat Google to the punch, offering many of the same features of Android Imprint, though in separate and proprietary ways. The fingerprint scanner on the back of the Nexus 5 is perfectly located and is easy to find and use after just a few times to get oriented with where it is and how it works. Now, does it work? Very well. Very fast. I've only encoded 2 of my fingers so far, both my index fingers, and recognition is all but instantaneous, with a very high accuracy rate. When your finger is scanned at an odd angle, or even upside down, the software is smart enough to match your finger and still manages to quickly unlock the phone. Turning on the Nexus 5 is particularly easy using the fingerprint scanner. Simply rest your finger on the scanner and your screen is turned on and your phone is unlocked faster than you can raise it to look at it. In addition to all that, Android 6.0 Marshmallow brings Now on Tap, a renewed permissions model, volume controls that finally work right, and an intelligent Do Not Disturb function that does exactly what it's supposed to do. We covered all of these in more detail in our Nexus 6 peer review, and since they're functionally equivalent on the Nexus 5X, there's no need to repeat all that over here. For the last 2 generations of Nexus phones, quality of pictures taken has been at the top of the priority list. Though last year's Nexus 6 had a decent camera, it wasn't great. That honor is reserved for the Nexus 5. The main shooter on the Nexus 5 is housed in the slight bump on the back of the phone, which looks a lot bigger in pictures than it actually is in real life. It features a 12.3 megapixel sensor and an f2.0 aperture and broad spectrum CRI 90 dual flash. OIS wasn't included because Google claims that the larger pixel size and IR laser-assisted autofocus negate the need. Moving around to the front, at 5 megapixels and an f2.0 aperture, the front-facing selfie camera isn't anything to scoff at either. Despite being a technically capable camera, the camera on the Nexus 5 seems to be unreachable at times. It doesn't like to rotate once the camera app is fired up, and is overall problematic and slow. There was an update for the Nexus 5X that had begun rolling out, which was thought to address some of these issues, but our review unit hasn't gotten the update as we went to press. When it behaves, however, the pictures and the video the Nexus 5 produces are nothing short of beautiful. On the whole, it produces amazing pictures even in low or dark light. When it comes to video, the Nexus 5X can shoot 4K at 30 frames per second and can capture slow motion at 120 frames per second. We'll walk and see how this does. It's Halloween time, so we got our decorations coming out. This camera's upsides far outweigh its negatives, and that's something we've never been able to say about the camera on any other Nexus. Of course, the Nexus 6P notwithstanding, which happens to use the same camera module as the Nexus 5X. We've used the Nexus 5X for about a week in the greater Salt Lake City, Utah area on the T-Mobile network. What's nice about a phone marketed as compatible with virtually any network, though, is that switching carriers is literally as easy as swapping SIMs, and the Nexus 5X should work with virtually any of the major carriers. Overall, the phone is fast and responsive. In fact, for the first few days, the Nexus 5X performed faster and smoother than any other phone we've reviewed in the Utah offices. However, over the last few days, it's begun to hiccup and stutter. Upon investigation, when waking, the phone seems to max out the CPU cores for a short amount of time, slowing everything down. Whether this is the natural consequence of doze mode pulling in a handful of updates all at once when you power on the phone, or the 64-bit hexa-core 1.8 GHz Snapdragon 808 processor showing its limitations, well, we're not certain. Most of the time this has just been frustrating, but occasionally it has required a reboot to get things back on track. Next up is battery life, which has been pretty good. On a full charge of the 2700 mAh battery, which takes under 2 hours using the included charger and USB Type-C cable, the Nexus 5X should last you all day and most of the evening before dropping to battery saving mode at about 15%. The Nexus 5X doesn't include Qualcomm Quick Charge, but it does support USB Type-C rapid charging. Pop the phone back on the charger for 10 minutes and you'll get almost 4 more hours of use. To achieve this, you'll need to use the included charger or one of a few compatible replacements. However, if you have access to a USB Type-A to USB Type-C cable, which isn't included, you'll still be able to use your old chargers. They just won't charge as quickly as the one that comes in the box. There are a few T-Mobile specific issues that haven't been worked out just yet. Those and the unexplained processor utilization issue are minor inconveniences, but they're still troubling on a new smartphone, especially one carrying the Nexus name brand. We'll keep an eye on them and report back when the Nexus 5 gets our After the Buzz treatment. We feel obliged to remind potential buyers of the old adage about getting what you pay for. If you want a top-of-the-line flagship, the Nexus 6P is a better buy, if you've got the money and you don't mind the phablet form factor. The 5X is no show horse. It's the phone you toss around without worrying about scratching it up. The one you buy because it's a good deal, not because it's delivering a premium experience. That having been said, the Nexus 5X is very much like its 2013 predecessor in that it delivers a lot of capability for a very competitive price point, and it manages to do so while still looking fairly sharp. At $379 US, the Nexus 5X is a tremendous value for the price. It's big enough to be functional, small enough to be pocketable, and is everything you've come to expect from the Nexus brand. For Pocketnow, I'm Joe Levi. We'll catch you next time.